Vice Chair.
In follow-up to Board Member McGuire's question, I just had some additional clarifying questions. So, well, first of all, just to be clear, I'm comfortable with the order, but this is just really a useful discussion that we're having here. And so, looking at how maybe things could have been done differently in this case, or, going forward, for future cases. So my question is, if we wanted to, since this was an enforcement proceeding, if we wanted to bring in the other parties, how would we have um, done that at the initial uh, filing, or Office of Enforcement at the initial filing, or um, if a decision was made to change course midway, in light of perhaps maybe more of a willingness to stretch things out, just looking for different process options.
Sure. So I'll defer to the Office of Enforcement on most of that issue, except to say that one, because it's largely up to them, right? I mean, they decide what goes in their charging document. We don't at the AHO don't get to go tell them, hey, you really should bring in these other parties right now. But in my personal view, they can do that at the outset of the case. They can also, react to what's happened in the hearing and change course as appropriate. I think they have that discretion and flexibility to bring new complaints, charging documents, draft orders, whatever you want to call them. And I will say that I don't want to seem like I'm criticizing the prosecution team here, because this hearing happened almost 8 years ago, and now there's a proposed order, and we're identifying these issues and talking about them. So I don't want to suggest that the prosecution team should have done this in a different way ab initio 8 years ago. I do want to suggest that in addressing the concerns and questions that are being raised, that they do have the discretion in future proceedings to change course in that way.
Sorry, Vice Chair, you're on mute again.
Thanks for the reminder. If the case started as waste and unreasonable use, but bringing in others where presumably there's not evidence of waste and unreasonable use, but maybe it would be more through public trust. I guess that's where I'm having some challenges. Could it switch over from waste and unreasonable use over to a broader adjudicatory proceeding on public trust?
I appreciate the question. I think I probably shouldn't comment so specifically on procedural mechanisms for bringing these cases before us beyond the thought that I think there's probably an ability to do
that. Looking to Ms. West if she wants to go ahead and address the discussion. And thank you, Ms. West.
Good morning again. Yeah, I just want to talk to the hypothetical, not about this order. And just on the hypothetical, I just want to remind the board that, and just for purposes of this discussion, that we were not adjudicating the rights of this party. We did not validate their rights, and if we would have brought in 2 other parties, it would have been the step would have been, we probably would have had to withdraw this complaint, bring in the other parties, and address whether or not they have their water rights claims are valid to begin with, before we went down the road of the rule of priority and how we would implement a minimum flow. But it would have been a much broader case with a different set of evidence and a number of different questions. But Nicole's joined us too, so maybe, I don't know if the AHO hearing officer has an opinion on that, but I don't think we could have added parties once this proceeded. We would have, I believe we probably would have had to withdrawn the complaint and alleged it as not only a waste on unreasonable use, but then broader than that, to bring in the other parties and bring in additional new evidence, and look to validate their claims of right on a level which this proceeding didn't involve. but that's
That's
just all.
really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Chair. Thank you, Ms. West.
And I would like to just weigh in for just a moment, Chair Escobar, if I can. I think what you're seeing is one of the challenges that we often have. And again, I think Hearing Officer Bevins made this point. This isn't to criticize the enforcement team. There are so many judgment calls that go in, both in terms of what's feeding into the water board system from concerned conservation groups, from downstream diverters. And a call needs to be made at some point in time about, do we want a narrow proceeding that we can move and on grounds that help advance the overall state of California's water rights system. For example, this board has issued some very important precedents, and this would build on that universe, talking about waste and unreasonable use. They're incremental decisions versus bringing more comprehensive claims that bring in other parties. And it's very hard when you get to the tail end of a proceeding and you've got parties who want broader claims to be addressed in them. It's simply a function that these adjudicate proceedings are important, but they aren't always the best vehicle and vessel to resolve some of these types of issues, which gets back to the point that had been raised both by the board and Mr. Bevins has talked about there are lots of tools outside of the adjudicate proceedings that help solve some of those problems, because it can really bring the full panoply of authorities to bear. And what I'm talking about now is quasi-legislative actions, potential in-stream flow actions. They raise their own issues. They do have some transactional costs, but they open up a larger universe for the board to consider and let you look along the larger stream system.